This is the Oculus, the most expensive train station ever built. It connects hundreds of thousands of people weekly, mostly for trains.
It's like 5:30 in the afternoon. All of those stores are open. Why is nobody walking into them?
This might be a mandatory tourist stop these days, but for locals, it's a bit of a controversial one. New Yorkers were not happy about how much it cost, or the fact that it went 2 times over budget, or the fact that it was built mostly with their tax money. And also, is this even a train station? It kind of looks like a mall, doesn't it? Not just a mall, but like a luxury mall. What type of 1%er shops at these stores anyway? But the Oculus is not the first, nor the only train station that has been mallified. In fact, those empty stores are evidence of a broader transformation of what train stations might need to become. It wasn't always like this though. America's first generation of train stations neither looked like this, nor came to be like this. They were actually built by private companies. The earliest traits of railroads came to America in the 1820s, and over the next few decades, tycoons like the Vanderbilts took on the opportunity. Eventually, the government understood that these trains were crucial to connecting this huge land and developing the economy of this young country. So around 1850, President Millard Fillmore signed a law that granted federal land to the state of Illinois to help finance the Illinois Central Railroad. And this kickstarted a whole era, actually called the land grant era, where the government would grant these lands to the railroad companies to help develop the country. It helped make these train families even more powerful, and eventually the need came to build transportation hubs in major cities to connect commuters to these trains. Penn Station in Manhattan first opened in 1910, and it was a masterpiece, especially compared to the 2000s Penn Station, which is the first one I ever encountered. But it was built and funded entirely by a private company, Pennsylvania Railroad, known as the Pennsy, at one point the largest corporation in the world. Then, Grand Central Terminal, inaugurated in 1913. Commissioned by New York Central Railroad, that's the Vanderbilt company. And these Beaux Arts iconic buildings, they weren't by any means malls, right? Like you had some newsstands, sure, places to eat like the Oyster Bar, but not Chanel. And they were primarily transit buildings, owned and maintained by these train companies with revenue from their train tickets. Because again, train stations are crucial for a city and for the economy. And according to the 70s magazine, land value around the terminals grew 244% between 1904 and 1926, thanks in part to Grand Central opening. There wasn't a single skyscraper north of 42nd Street when Grand Central opened its doors. But 15 years later, about half of Manhattan's skyscrapers were north of the terminal. This all worked well for society, but it wouldn't last forever. Post-war America was different. Post-war America had planes. After World War II, ridership started this consistent decline that left these train companies in ruins. The companies behind these two stations had merged, in part to try and save themselves, into a company called Penn Central, which still went bankrupt in the 70s. And what about the trains? People do still need to get places. Trains are a public service, they help develop the country and the economy, right? Somebody had to save the trains. And so in the 70s, through different legal conundrums that I'm not gonna bore you with, these stations became part of the government, through Amtrak, a new government entity, and through the MTA. But here's a question. Do we trust a government agency to use our tax money efficiently to run and maintain train stations? That's a loaded question, and honestly something that these train stations have been trying to figure out for decades. They might finally have cracked the code, but we're gonna get there. Let's head back to the World Trade Center now. Here, the Oculus hub connects downtown Manhattan to New Jersey. The station was commissioned by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, a public entity run by both states to replace the station that stood there before 9/11. But it ended up being the world's most obscenely overpriced commuter rail station, and possibly the ugliest. The New York Post editorial board, not my words. I actually quite like the Oculus, but anyway. The city wanted something grandiose to stand next to the 9/11 memorial, and Santiago Calatrava, the architect they hired, delivered. I actually love this structure. Freaking marble floors, like this insane skylight. It's iconic, but it was expensive, as in like $4 billion expensive. By the way, nobody blames Calatrava for this. Like, the blame lies in the project management and politicians whose priorities outweighed worries and the bottom line, at least according to the New York Times article. Unrealistic deadlines inflated costs to that staggering $4 billion, about $3 billion of which came from federal funds, and the other $1 billion from the Port Authority itself. Now, what people don't usually talk about is that most of the $1 billion funds that the Port Authority contributed to the project came from another player, and that's Westfield, a private company that paid $600 million to own 50% of the retail areas inside the Oculus. And a few years after that, it bought the rest of the retail space for an extra $800 million. So let's break this structure down, because under the Oculus, you have the subway tracks, which belong to the MTA. You also have the path lines that cross the Hudson River, and those are owned by the Port Authority. The land and building are owned by the Port Authority. But this retail subsection, the stores inside the structure, that's the part that Westfield bought, the part that very much looks like a mall. And how is that working out for them? We're gonna get there in a sec, but first let's look back at the city's other stations, those publicly owned and operated. Now, according to the New York State Comptroller, Grand Central is projected to need $2.7 billion in repairs for the period between 2025 and 2027. And just like the old days, those repairs are supposed to come from train profits, right? Well, Metro North, which operates out of Grand Central, closed in 2024 with a $1 billion cash deficit. The Long Island Railroad, which also operates out of Grand Central, had a cash deficit of around $1.4 billion. And there's a little bit of revenue from rent. There's the Oyster Bar that came back after going bankrupt in the 70s. There's that Apple store, but flags were raised because they got too good of a deal on that lease. So hear me out. Maybe the government isn't that great at operating train stations, and that is bad because those inefficiencies end up being paid with our tax money. So is there another way? Maybe retail is the answer. We are in the middle of a major transformation in how retail works. The renaissance of physical stores, retail media networks, live shopping. The Hustle team has been working on a report on the retail reset, which dives into the 5 biggest trends that big players are betting on. We explore what's driving these 5 big shifts and the opportunities that are emerging as traditional retail model evolves. It's completely free. It's available to download here, I guess in the description, and with this QR code here. Now, around those dark ages of private train companies going bankrupt, another model got a test run, and we need to get out of New York City for that one. This is Washington, D.C.'s Union Station, once owned by the Washington Terminal Company, which also, you guessed it, struggled in the 70s, left the station in ruins, roof collapsed, their whole operation had to be restructured under federal oversight. Desperate for some funding to bring it back to life, Amtrak, aka the government, sought help from private investors and struck a deal in 1983. So a group called Union Station Ventures, USV, agreed to buy a 99-year lease on the retail areas of the station. So enter PPP, the Public-Private Partnership. Now, there's a mess of other government entities that own the building, the tracks. I'm not gonna get into that. But the point is that USV now had this 90-year master lease over the retail space inside the station. And this gave them control. They were in charge of finding tenants for the stores, collecting rent revenue, you know, the food, the coffee, the newsstands. And in exchange, they would be in charge of the upkeep, you know, making sure that the roof didn't fall off again. And it seemed like a great opportunity to combine the powers of government and private companies to prop up this critical, historic infrastructure in the heart of DC. And for a while, it actually did great. By the time I was born in the fall of 1988, the $160 million remodeling had just concluded. At some point, it had over 100 stores occupied. But after the 2000s, Union Station started struggling again. By the fall of 2022, only 40 out of 100 stores were still open for business. The private company that ran the retail area defaulted on its loans. COVID made things so bad that the Starbucks closed, citing public safety reasons. But we still need trains, right? Because trains boost the economy. Only a few months ago, Amtrak, aka the government, stepped in once again to buy out USV, or really the company that owned USV later, never mind, to buy them out of the lease and then control the station outright. Now they had hopes and expansion plans, but is this all a lost cause? Like, is it even worth saving inner city train travel? Like, trains are still fundamental to travel in China or Japan or Europe, and train stations don't struggle with funding like they do in America. Maybe we need some outside the US thinking. Let's revisit the Oculus one more time. Westfield, the European entity that bought all of the retail space in the Oculus, is by all means a mall operator. They own properties all over the world, and their KPIs, their investor reports, they all trail back to occupancy rates. In 2022, due to pure occupancy rates, it decided to sell all of its US properties. Now, Westfield's retail space at their World Trade Center has never been fully occupied. Vacancy in 2022 was around 23%. It had to go, right? It's not making money. But in 2024, there were signs that they were gonna take that decision back. The CEO stated that they wanted to keep their high-performing flagship malls in the US because they still believe those properties can deliver future growth. They have not yet indicated if the Oculus is part of those high performers, especially if nobody's even walking into these stores. But stores at the Oculus aren't necessarily there to sell. In a post-pandemic e-commerce world, brick and mortar is not so much a sales point as a sales touch, a rather expensive reminder of the brand existence. A billboard, if you will. Now, for these brands, the store might be a place where consumers can experience the brand, even if the purchase ends up happening online. As digital as we might be, physical presence still carries weight. Like, I don't know what ad you got before you watched this video, but pretty much anybody could put an ad there. But what kind of brand gets a billboard in a place that you walk by every day, where hundreds of thousands of people walk by every day? It has to be a strong brand, right? According to this report by Brookfield Properties, top-of-mind brand awareness was 45% higher when respondents were shown a physical storefront as compared to seeing the same brand online on a banner. 70% of people thought retail brands that have physical stores in malls were more appealing than online-only brands. 80% of people even said that they'd pay a little more to buy the product in a physical store. Across the US, there's been this phenomenon of obsolete retail space. It's retail that is not expected to recover ever because the dynamics and the consumer preferences have changed so much. And most of that happened in what they call regional supermalls. But in cities, there seems to be an opportunity to centralize these brick and mortar experiences in a safe, well-lit place that you have to walk the 1 or 2 times that you come into the city every week because your company went hybrid. Now, that definitely gets the eyes and the brand credibility, and maybe as you're commuting back home, maybe the impulse sale. This physical presence is powerful. According to CBRE, it's luxury and upscale brands that are driving rent movements in Manhattan this year, only behind food and beverage. And that makes sense to me. Like, if I'm paying hundreds of dollars for an item, like, I probably want to see it or experience it or try it on first, I guess, if I would buy anything that expensive. But not every brand can afford to offer these experiences. Now, luxury brands seem to be part of Westfield's thesis for keeping this property. It's pretty obvious from the stores in the main Oculus hall, or how completely outpriced I feel if I ever walk to Brookfield Place, which is the mall that's connected to the Oculus on the other end of World Trade Center. Let's look at the last one, Penn Station. So Penn Station has been a nasty underground labyrinth for years, far from the masterpiece that it used to be. The original building sat empty for years because renovating it was once again too expensive of a project for Amtrak to take with its own capital and with train ticket sales. But a new public-private partnership gave us the new Moynihan Train Hall, inaugurated in 2021. A massive upgrade from the old Penn Station, funded by another 99-year lease, in this case by Vornader Realty Trust, who contributed $630 million to the project, along with $970 million from the MTA, Port Authority, Amtrak, New York State, and some federal grants. Moynihan's main floor shows strong occupation. It has a lively food court, stores, Walgreens, my favorite ramen place in the city. Some people have complained about the lack of chairs or garbage bins, but malls aren't famous for their abundant seating, because it's about just keeping people moving, right? So the stores downstairs feel less upscale than at the Oculus. There's a lax food court, there's a pub, more like the shop that you'll want to walk into while you wait for your train. But upstairs is a different story. Is anyone talking about the fact that there are 3 shops in this entire floor? Just 3 shops open. It's hard to pinpoint what the upstairs strategy will be in terms of luxury stores, but $200 rain parkas or $40 face cleansers, they're not middle-class purchases, I'd say. Now, this floor connects nicely to Hudson Yards, another upscale new development in the city, and that might be the bet to get more foot traffic in this area. Now, even if Vornado doesn't report Moynihan occupancy or profitability directly, investors seem happy with the results on their last quarter. And we're yet to see if more stores, or what kind of stores, paint the story, and if they can avoid the pitfalls of Union Station. But for us commuters, like, these malls work? I mean, whether you're commuting to work occasionally or just using the train for a longer trip, we can only hope that the power of public and private together can save trains from shutting down altogether. Like, trains boost the economy, and for decades, America has been trying to figure out how to fix this broken train system. So if ticket sales are not enough to keep these train stations up to standards, then, well, maybe creating these retail spaces, whether they function as billboards or as actual shops, at least solves part of the problem that the stations are facing. As for when America is getting their own bullet train, I think that's a video for another day. In the meantime, you should watch my man Tori's video on why airports are full of fake restaurants. Also, don't forget to grab our report on retail trends here or here. Catch you in the next one.